Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 9th talk of the Digital Food Series 2021 on this beautiful May Day. We have a full house today. I think there's a lot of interest on the topic today and our speakers. First of all, I'm Tiffany Tsui. I'm the co-organizer and moderator of this series. I'm Chinese. I'm also Dutch. I'm living in the Netherlands. I focus on sustainability, technology, and transformation, and bridging East with West, which is also very much the kind of theme of today also. Together with Dick Veerman, founder of Foodlog, we developed the concept of the Digital Food 2021 to focus on the theme of connect. So connect data, technology, and strategy, and connecting people, ideas, and regions. Thank you for the sponsors, ktba, InfoSupport, SyncForce, City of Rotterdam, Province Zuid-Holland, Greenport West-Holland, Leiden Delft Erasmus University, and Wageningen University. So today we focus on the EU Green Deal. At the heart of the EU Green Deal, biodiversity and farm fork strategies, it's having strong focus for European Union to achieve a new balance of nature, food systems, and biodiversity. But the strategy and the goal is admirable, but it's not without controversies. So to start, let's immediately assess the temperature of our participant today. Bianca, let's pull up the poll questions number 1. So we have a question very simple, just yes or no. Do you support the Green Deal's goal of 25% organic farming? We don't allow any middle ground here, so I have to choose your position. Once you are done, then we can pull our second poll question. And we can maybe, yeah. Can we already show the second question? Yes, and then we can show the result together. So the second question is, in this Green Deal strategy, there's a very specific goal to achieve the reduction in environmental impact in the sense of 50% reduction in kilogram of chemical pesticide. So the question is, do you agree that this is a sound, implementable, achievable policy goal? It's also yes or no. So when we get the results, we can already show the poll result, Bianca. Okay, so this is our, today we have a majority of our audience that do not support the organic 25% goal, and why that is, we'll go into a discussion. Also, I welcome our audience to raise hands, give your questions in the comment section, and to share why do you agree or not agree. And the next poll question result. Here we have a exactly polarizing 50-50. Some agree it's a good idea, some not. So and later we can hear what Petra and Krijn thinks about the position. So these two questions basically positions our discussion today. The target, the goal is good for for the world to go for a digital green future, but how to get there? How do you measure it? Who benefits and who pays for it? So the first speaker today is Krijn Poppe, policy advisor and former research manager at Wageningen University. Krijn spent his life's work on working with European farmers and developing standard metrics and tools. So Krijn, please open today's discussion by helping us frame our discussion.
Yes, good afternoon and a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I indeed worked for 40 years as a business economist in Wageningen Agricultural University and Research. I retired, so I forgot already the name of my employer. I still do policy advice a few days a week, including the Commission and some provinces in the Netherlands and the Dutch government. I hope to share my screen. That should work this way, I think. Yes. What I'd like to do in the next 10-15 minutes, I think, is for those who are not very aware of the EU Green Deal and its farm to fork strategy, to show you 2 slides. And then I have 2 slides with my comments for the discussion. This is a statement by Frans Timmermans, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, just copied from the website of the committee, who states that the coronavirus crisis has been instrumental to put forward this Green Deal with, for our discussion today, 2 important strategies, the biodiversity strategy and the farm to fork strategy, and to take up the new challenges on nature, food systems, and biodiversity, and better balance that. And there are a couple of targets in this farm to fork strategy as part of the Green Deal, formulated for 2030. The first one we saw just already in the poll, the target of pesticides and to reduce the use by 50%. Then the second issue is on the excess of nutrients, where the target is to reduce the nutrient losses by at least 50% and reduce fertilizer use by 20%. So there's here a clear move away from chemicals, as you see. Then the issue of antibiotics, the antimicrobial resistance issue in farmed animals and aquaculture, also to reduce the sale of those antibiotics with 50%. And then, as we have just also seen in the poll, the idea to improve or to promote organic farming as an environmental friendly practice towards 25% of total farmland being used for organic farming by 2030. That is not necessarily by each member state, but nevertheless, it's a very clear target. Some of my comments, well, first of all, this is clearly in the idea of a green recovery. Let's use the current COVID-19 crisis and the economic fallout as a green recovery of the economy. And then I think most of us here agree that climate change and biodiversity loss are very big challenges for the world and Europe. And another aspect of the Green Deal, I think, is that digitalization is a potential solution. There's a lot of progress in data science, in robotics, etc. My second remark is that the farm to food strategy has targets, not yet policy interventions. So you can have a target, but then what are your instruments? How are you going to do that? These are not yet specified. On the contrary, there is currently on request of, I think, 6 or 7 DGs in Brussels. The Joint Research Center of the European Union runs an expert group. I have to disclose that I'm a member. There's an expert group that looks how DG Santé, who leads the whole action within the Commission, could propose to the Parliament and the Council of Ministers a general food law on the sustainability of food systems. So in that sense, I think good proposals are still welcome. A couple of issues to start the discussion, I think. If you look to policy interventions, then of course the first question in such a food policy, food system policy, is who do you target? The usual suspects like the farmers or the consumers? Have they to eat organic, for instance? Or do you target other food system actors? Like the chemical companies or seed companies or dairy companies, slaughterhouses, whatever. Take an example, for instance, for organic farming. Well, first of all, the question is, of course, is it very clever to look only to organic farming? On one hand, that is perhaps logic in the Commission because that's one of the few things they have. On the other hand, you could say there are other sustainable methods. There are labels. The French introduced this haute valeur de environnement label recently, I learned. There are probably other sustainable methods. And as a Dutch minister once said, the minister does not manage chickens. It are the farmers who do that. So should we prescribe exactly what they do? The other challenge here is, of course, if you increase production to 25% of the area, you very quickly risk a collapse of the current market for the current farmers, because the market is not that big. So supply promotion is perhaps not a good idea. Then you could say, let's convince the consumer to buy it. Well, I think even if you throw out a lot of marketing money, I think in the Netherlands, the market share is 3 or 4%. If you want to grow that to 25% within 8 years or 9 years, you will not raise demand enough, I think. I didn't do calculations, but that would be my feeling. Then you could, of course, do something like we do in the petrol market, where we oblige companies to take in ethanol in their petrol, or car companies, you could oblige them to make some electric cars at a certain percentage, and otherwise you could do such a regulation, for instance, and say, well, dairy companies and slaughterhouses have to buy 25% organic and mix it. I'm not saying that I'm in favor for it, but this is what we should discuss if this target is really the target that we want to have. Then, as my last slide, as this is on digitalization, there is, I think, a need to go to look in how far we can promote sustainability with more digitalization. Before I do that, some basic economics in supply and demand. I think that most of you have seen that in your first course on economics. At the moment that the price is higher, you get more supply. And if the price is lower, you get more demand. And at the cross of these two equations, you find the price and the current market volume. That's essentially the most difficult thing in economics, I think, which you have to understand. Less chemicals, of course, moves the supply chain. I took this idea for this graph from Tassos Haniotis from DG Agri, I should say. Less chemicals moves the supply chain, supply equation to the left, and will then lead to higher prices. And some will argue that the world market is growing to 10 billion people. You can, of course, discuss if Europe should use its environment to subsidize that export, but there is a world market for products. And if you would take only a classical agricultural assessment, agricultural economics assessment of the situation, then you would say these are all bad ideas. But if you look from a food policy angle, there is, of course, more happening. There's a lot of food waste, especially in Western countries on the consumer side. And there is a lot of production of animal protein. We eat too much protein anyway. And secondly, we shifted over the last 40 years from 40% animal protein and 60% plant protein to just the other way around, 60% animal protein. If we would remove that to the 1970 level of 40-60, then we would save a lot of production, I think, in the use of the feed area. And then, as I said, in the supply situation, there is, of course, a lot of substitution of knowledge and precision agriculture for chemicals. We know from trials with precision agriculture that you easily save chemicals in the double-digit area. The last argument in this discussion is, of course, the people who are food insecure, people in Europe that get their food from food banks. the food deserts in some American cities, and the 1 billion people in India, China, Africa who are food insecure. The discussion is, of course, is this a price problem or is this an income problem? At least in Europe, I would say this is due to the neoliberal social policies that we had in the last 30 years, and this is not a price problem, it is an income problem, and we should have different income policies. But perhaps I've read Thomas Piketty from France too much. Let's look in my last slide to digital agriculture. I think we need digital dashboards for farmers. First of all, because we want better management on those farms. So farmers need better tools to measure and manage sustainability with performance indicators to substitute this knowledge for chemicals. Secondly, in the common agriculture policy, if we have these policy targets, then we should also monitor that. The current monitoring of the common agriculture policy is very much based on satellites. That doesn't work for antibiotics. So you have an agency problem and you have to get access to the data of the farmers. The industry does that already. We call that certification. They have all these sustainability schemes or organic schemes, or in the Netherlands on the way to Planet Proof or animal welfare schemes where farms are certified. And I think for that reason that farmers need a digital dashboard with sustainability indicators that needs to be auditable by certificated auditors, and therefore I think it should be integrated with the VAT, the value added tax reporting, because then if you miss an invoice for your report on your sustainability indicators, then at least you punish yourself, because you also not get back 20% of your VAT on that feed or chemicals that you bought. Couple of bottlenecks. There is not a lack of indicators, neither of indicator frameworks. I think in my own discipline of research, it's very easy to come up with new indicators. It's perhaps even too much. I think that one part of the problem why farmers do not have good dashboard yet is that food manufacturers and the supply industries and all these labels set up their own websites. And typically say, type in your data here. And farmers don't like that at all. If you have to type in your data 3-4 times and take these invoices and then type in your data on a website. So the question is, who empowers farmers with data integration? And I think the first step we should do in Europe, Hungary did this already, is digitalize all the invoices. Then you have all the data automatically, and an algorithm could match that with the banking data for VAT reporting, and you have a dashboard with at least 50% of the indicators. That data integration is technically not a problem. There are standards from standard organizations like GS1 or Ag Gateway, but I think that the chain actors concentrate very much on their own big data strategy. That's very nice if you're listed on the stock market, and blockchains, etc., which are good things within the chain. But I think we need a concerted action that puts the farmer central and empowers farmers to have a good digital dashboard with indicators on our targets. With that, the wish that next year you will be able to see the flowers in the Netherlands if you come to the Netherlands again. And some commercial for EuroChoices, a paper in which I'm involved. Then I leave it here, Tiffany. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Krijn. Also, we're at our 9th talk since the launching about 3 months ago. So a lot of old friends here. Also our past speakers. I think I would like to welcome Anka Hemminga, who gave from Cargill, who gave a presentation about the GFLI indicator, as Krijn already mentioned, is one of a leading indicator framework development. So that was also interesting. I would hear from, for example, Anka, why is there no dashboard yet integrating, for example, the GLFI database information? And then also we have, I would like to actually ask a little feedback from our audience. In the beginning of our session, 50 or majority people said, you do not support the 25% organic farming goal. So I'd like to invite one person, please raise your hand, to tell us why do you say you don't support it? Should I call somebody or should you please raise your hand? we'll know each other. Okay, please. Caroline? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, got it.
Great.
Yes, well, as I think Krijn also stated that, well, I don't think it is a good idea to focus on one specific management system like organic, because I think there can be many different farming systems that would contribute to the Green Deal objectives. So I think it is a bit limiting to only focus on organic. That's my point.
Okay. Thank you. So then the time we move to Petra Laux, Acting Chief Sustainability Officer at Syngenta. So also congratulate Petra. You are quite new to the job, aren't you?
Thank you, Tiffany. Yes, I started in January, but I have been the head of European business sustainability for the 2 years before. So I have followed the Green Deal discussions quite intensely.
Yes.
And maybe let's start with a few words about, Syngenta's perspective on the Green Deal and on sustainable agriculture. And we overall believe the Green Deal is something like an opportunity of a lifetime, right, to create change in the change that society wants. We would probably say we support the vision of the Green Deal. We also support the vision for agriculture. We would suggest a different pathway to go about it and to achieve the goals. So for us, agriculture has a triple challenge. The triple challenge is all the environmental challenges. It's the food security challenges, as Krijn also said. Yes, we have, the question is, should Europe be the area to feed the 10 billion people, or would it rather be, every region itself, which we all know is not possible if you look at the population and the distribution of arable land. However, so we have a food security challenge, we have an environmental challenge, and we have a social challenge, because the livelihood of farmers is a big issue in many countries, and we are close to farmers, right? They are our customers. We hear their concerns every day in, day out. Now, how would we suggest to go about reforming agriculture in Europe? And maybe let me share the one slide that comes pretty close to what you have been presenting, Krijn, and it's a little bit of our vision. So we would like to focus actually not on the 25% of land that is supposed to be dedicated to organic agriculture. We are really concerned about how can we make a difference and impact the 75% of land that is out there where farmers work every day in and day out. And so we have pulled up what are the outcomes parameters we believe the European Commission needs to set targets for, so that all participants in the food system, because that was one of your questions, Krijn, who is actually in charge? It is, first of all, the farmers, of course, because they farm. It's input companies like us, because we help farmers achieve the goals. It's the traders, the commodity traders, it's the food companies, and it's the end of the consumer. And all of them, the whole system needs to be geared to be achieving the outcomes society wants. And we believe the 5 pillars I've listed here are the ones that are most relevant for Europe. So the first is about soil, to reverse soil gradation and desertification, and it's all about soil carbon and how can we increase this carbon content in healthy soils. The second is about neutralizing greenhouse gas emissions from farming. Agriculture is responsible for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at the whole food chain, it's about 25% if you include the animal production and then the production of processed food. This can, so the 10% of agriculture can easily be reduced towards zero with carbon and microbial rich soils for the respective practices. The third outcome we still need is increased productivity and plant potential. So in the whole goals, also in the European strategy, there are dilemmas and trade-offs. We want to revive biodiversity, and the best way to increase biodiversity is to dedicate land to the wilderness, to nature, and there is this trade-off with the effective use of the land. And so food produced per unit of land or food produced per unit of inputs actually has to stay a key component, because we could all agree that the best way to protect nature is to stop farming, but that doesn't do the trick at the end of the day. The fourth pillar is improved biodiversity and ecosystem health. It can be about diversity on and around farms. This area is probably the one which is most difficult to measure yet. We have a huge research program launched to develop indicators for biodiversity and soil. And we are also working on measurement systems, lenses that, for example, capture insect activity on farmland, because we believe it's a real lack that this system is not yet available. And last but not least, the fifth pillar here is about increasing water security in water challenged areas. It's also purity of water. This can be achieved through managing the nutrients balance. It can be achieved through reducing water use. So, Krijn, to your point, we could construct a dashboard along these lines, and so can also manage and observe the dilemmas. Since the question here was directly, what do we think about pesticide reduction? So for me, the pesticide reductions come implicitly by trying to achieve these objectives here. If you want to limit greenhouse gas emissions, you need to adopt no-till practices. That means you need to apply a chemical form of weed control. So pesticides are required here. At the same time, we try to limit them. And we are working on exciting technologies like see and spray techniques, or we are building maps. And this is to your point, Krijn, of the digital potential. I understand weeds often come in patches, and we are working on a system, for example, where a GPS system monitors the field, sees where the weed patches is, and transforms this into a spray protocol for the sprayer to actually apply more pesticides on the weed patch areas than besides. That's one example. So pesticide reduction comes implicitly. It also comes in the biodiversity measurement when it comes to insecticides. So if we want to improve biodiversity, we need to be very mindful of how and when and how to properly use the products available. By the way, organic farming is not a way to reduce pesticide use. As we all know, organic farming uses pesticides as well in many more kilos than conventional farmers do, simply because the products they use are old and used in high quantities, are sprayed much more often. So who believes organic farming will reduce or do anything on the indicators on pesticide use is unfortunately mistaken. And one of the big innovation gaps we are having is that there is no successor product for copper available. So not to make this a monologue, what else did I want to say? Yes, finalize maybe. So if we have this dashboard, we must not forget that there must be a business model for biodiversity on farm. We can all sit here and think about brilliant indicators, can agree on something, can measure them, but that also must fit with the market and economic environment the farmer is being faced. You talked about labels. That is one way to show the success of farmers in regenerative farming or nature positive farming. You can think about subsidies, because we unfortunately have no economic market for nature. So the public policy needs to replace some of that economic incentive. But our experience simply is, since we work with farmers day in and day out, it must be practical, economically attractive, and doable at farm level. And that is what Syngenta's mission is about. How can we help actually provide the services, the digital tools, to help farmers do a better job? So maybe I
Thanks.
stop here.
Yeah, thanks, Petra. Behind me, I have a picture showing one of your solutions. It's now already being implemented in China. It's a picture from a grower friend of mine in China, in Beijing, this Hortipolaris. They are authorized grower for this Yum variety. And then you can see that the blockchain-enabled track and trace labeling, which is not a private or certification label, it's directly the MAP label. So it's not just the technology behind the scene. In fact, in China, it's part of the price proposition, the consumer positioning. So using this track and trace, so that to also justify a product that's high quality, good variety, authentic, and of course the price. It's in China, the organic of premium product, you're talking about 5 to sometimes 10 times of price differential than let's say the mass market product. Whereas in Europe, as Krijn already indicated, the organic market is very small. The price differential here in Europe is probably 35% and not 5 times. So that's a question of who in the end pays for it. And this image from China is interesting as a comparison or inspiration that in fact, of course, China is a movement that is with the big retailers like Alibaba, technology companies, but also government policy, which things can or may start moving rather quickly, because you have both the consumer who's willing to pay for it and the technology is ready, and government has a strong policy pushing for soil health and organic and sustainable agriculture. So how does this roadmap for Europe might look like, with the difference in regional situation, but also very different kind of governance management systems? So how would it might look like in Europe in the next few years? Would it be technology like this map we see here also to be in Europe, in the Albertines and the Dutch supermarkets, or would it be still more in a European cooperative ways, like Krijn indicated? There should be not a large technology company firm driven type of solutions, but rather should be more farmer driven. And that's of course interesting development that's to be seen.
Maybe one little example or point. Krijn, you also talked about the standards and how can we measure things. So we believe as an industry and as a food chain, we need to agree on standards together. One example is, how can you track the use of chemicals? That was one of the questions you had, Krijn. And we started out with thinking, okay, look, we take a bottle of our products, there's a label on the product, the grower goes and scans the label, and then the machine knows how to use the product with all the safety, drift reduction, away from water, which weather, which time of the day, so you can make it intelligent so that the error is reduced. And then the machine has the data stored in the farmer's management system, about what was applied when and how and for what crop, etc. Okay, and then we were thinking, practically, that's very nice if you can do this with a Syngenta bottle, but actually it's totally unpractical. It needs to be an industry-wide solution, because no farmer will only choose one sort of compound. So it's not feasible. It does not achieve the goal, and also the data must be used for also for a regulator, for incentives, because you did the right things, for control with compliance, for proof of concept, is the product safe? And so we made this idea a key initiative of CropLife Europe, and it's one of the key change contributions we as an industry are putting forward to establish this digital infrastructure across all industry, across all Europe, by aligning on the codes, the interfaces, the data sources, and to make this available. And this would allow what you were suggesting, Krijn, also tracking and tracing then about how was that product produced, at least from a crop protection perspective, and you would allow this transparency for the consumer.
Krijn, would you like to also have a respond with questions for Petra? Also,
I think
yes.
on it, well, 2 points perhaps. So on this last point, I think that's an excellent idea. I've seen some of those examples. The worry perhaps for the commissioner in general, of course, is that there is a large array of technology users or people who don't hardly use any technology or have a spraying machine that is 5 years old and are not so much into digital farming. I should explain that in the 1990s, I helped to create in the Netherlands our mineral accounting system for livestock farmers, in which we regulated farmers on the nitrate directive, on their mass balances for nitrogen and phosphate. And the risk is, of course, that somebody has some money and drives to Belgium and buys the thing. So if you, at the moment that you want to give farmers a subsidy or regulate it or certificate them, you have to have an auditable system that also checks those 5% that is not building the nice proposed technology, but is indeed very much certifiable, because you also know that they have not done the wrong things. And that asks, I think, in my thinking, in an integration of with financial flows in the accounting system, and should be systems that can be used for all farms, including those with those nice technologies and the contractors and the drone flyers behind them. So in that sense, there are still some issues to be solved. That was mainly my point. Another interesting point for discussion, I think, is the land sparing and land sharing issue. I totally agree with you that certainly from an ecological point of view, it's best to separate and to say, here we do have nature and there we do have agriculture. Economists also like that, because well, that leads to specialization. And you probably also, I'm not an ecologist, but you have the best results in ecology. You can do in nature what you wish, and in agriculture what you wish. But there are, I think, in crowded countries like the Netherlands or Belgium, also very big examples where this is not the most optimal solution, because industry tends to concentrate in clusters near harbors like the Netherlands or Belgium. On the best soils, which is fine, but there is no automatic guarantee that if we do, well, we could end up with all the agriculture in the Netherlands and Flanders, and with the forest and the nature in parts of Poland or Switzerland, which is fine for those regions, but not for the people who live here and want to go for a walk on Sunday. Besides the thing that there is some special nature, of course, with meadow birds that is linked to agriculture. So in that sense, the land sparing, land sharing issue is probably a little bit more mixed than also in the Netherlands. You see people who say, well, we should have 100% land sparing and no sharing at all. And I think that for crowded areas, if it is New York State or the Netherlands or Flanders, this is a very much more nuanced story. That nevertheless means that you have to breed plants and grow them very intensively where that is possible, of course.
And my understanding is, Krijn, there are also sufficient biodiversity supporting tools around farmland, right?
Yeah.
As an organization, we have lots of experience with multifunctional flower strips.
Yeah.
And we recently had data from some of our Spain reference farms. You can increase biodiversity of insects by 134% within 2 years. So it's doable. And actually the interesting piece is, if we think about going forward with such a dashboard, it's not that only organic farms care for biodiversity. You can use this approach also in conservative agriculture, and build this in. And this is why these measurements and targets are so interesting.
Yeah. Coming back to the kilograms of pesticides that Tiffany mentioned in the beginning, are you able on the pesticides to give them an, I think that there was a Dutch consultancy, CLM, in the 1990s that worked with environmental impact factors. And then you have, of course, to know how they are applied, under how much wind there is, or what the weather circumstances are. But is there a possibility that pesticides could have an environmental impact factor instead of just this crude kilogram measure?
I think we have that already today, Krijn. If you look, there is the harmonized risk indicator.
Okay.
That is, I understand, the one measure that the member states could agree to. And the harmonized risk indicator is a composite measure of volume and risk.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, it's actually not risk, it's hazard of the compound. And we are in the camp that we would say it's risk that matters, because even a very toxic pesticide, if you can apply this properly and it can be safe in its use, like everywhere in life, driving a car is dangerous, but you can have a safety belt. So, and same here, we invest a lot in these technologies, how to make the use of our products even safer, and we invest a lot in training farmers. And with all these digital tools, we hope to also improve decision making. So if I listen to our chief digital officer, and now it's fascinating, he believes we can actually foresee any decision a farmer needs to make in future of when and what to apply with much more precision based on the specificities of his field. While everything we put in labels normally is average experience, right? But by being able to target the recommendation exactly to the situation you are in today as a farmer on your field, it will be much, much better.
Yeah.
Thanks, Petra and Krijn. And Petra has to, unfortunately, for important board meeting in 10 minutes. So I'd like to also give opportunity for our audience. Actually, I'd like to invite two. For Petra or for Krijn, that in the beginning that we had a polarizing poll of 50% for the 25% or 50% reduction. Now 50% is against it. So I'd like to maybe ask one audience who voted not supporting, or supporting actually, sorry, first, who supports this 50% kilogram reduction, to explain why do you support it, and also give your maybe your question for Krijn or Petra. Anybody volunteer? The ones who voted say I do not, or I do support that is good goal, achievable. Anybody? Because we do not know, of course, who voted yes and no. What about the one who voted supporting or not supporting? I was so confused.
Maybe Tiffany, there's one question in the chat.
Yes, I have two questions actually.
Yeah. And I have a quick thought. I have a quick thought on the technology solutions. Why I'm so confident that this will help when it had limited impact in the past. And I would say technology had a massive impact on agriculture in the past, because we sort of tripled food production by only using 13% more land. What is different now is the challenge is different now. And like every industry, we have an innovation cycle. So it takes about 10 years to develop a crop protection product. So what we are selling today, we have developed 10 years, and we are in a go, right? And invented 10 years ago. So as an industry and in Syngenta, we are in a retooling cycle. Everything we do now, we hope to be able to constantly improve and bring to the market in the next years to come. And we are not yet there, but we have changed the orientation of our research to the different challenges. So that's my answer. Fine.
There's another question from Lars, actually. So Lars, would you like to quickly explain your question?
Let me do that. Hey everybody. What I was wondering, I was listening to your idea on the harmonization, Petra. Thank you for elaborating on that. The one thing the one question that I had was, if you harmonize compounds and you harmonize definitions, it makes it easier to audit, but it makes it easier to audit the administrative cycle, so to speak. So it makes it easier to audit the process. What it doesn't do, in my humble opinion, is prevent misuse. So you cannot be present everywhere all the time with auditing capacity. So at one point in time, I think you have to substitute or strengthen that approach by employing other assurance measures. So one of the things that I was thinking about is to just simply test for pesticide residues, forbidden pesticide residues, or pesticide residues that come in doses that are exceeding regulatory limits, for example. How are you perceiving this issue? I was just interested in your vision on this.
So my general understanding, if I also look at the EFSA report, it was released last month, 95% of, or even 98% of all food sampled is below the residue level allowed, and the residue level has 100% safety margin. So I think we are safe in Europe, as that our food is not endangering health. Yeah? The question is more the impact on the ecosystems and the climate change impact. And Lars, you make a good point. We cannot have a control environment everywhere. So that's why I think I said somewhere it needs to work for the farmers. If you get a better deal by circumventing measures, that's always bad. Another thing I can think about is I recently met a famous company, I don't know if they want to be quoted, from the Champagne area. Yeah, and if you have geographic indications, you know your farmers very well. And we also have had a collaboration with Barilla, I think in Italy, and then this is the Champagne area. So we are thinking about how you build a farmers network, to reward and have a constant supply approach. That's another thought, but there's no one size fits all solution, I believe.
No, it's especially interesting when you perceive it from the end of agriculture in developing countries or tropical agriculture, because those farm networks, I like that idea. And if you have a certain familiarity with your farm groups, then of course you will limit or drastically limit the risk of fraud. But how does that work in systems where there is a disconnect between the farm and the actual processor or producer? So I know for a fact that there are certain diagnostics techniques that you could deploy to scan pesticide residues, as it's now been done in Europe, for example, for food safety purposes. You can basically, using diagnostics, you can diagnose any sort of either soil quality, compounds, residues, etc., etc. So I'm not saying that that's the silver bullet, because it's expensive, but perhaps if you use it in combination with strengthened farm management systems and compound alignment, then perhaps you will have something that gets us just one step further to assuring this cycle.
Yeah, I think that in the debate of the Green Deal and farm to fork in the European circumstances, then we have to base our instruments, I think, on the trust of farmers and think that they are good willing, and a lot can be done with farm groups and with incentives in saying, well, you have to be certified as a farmer, or the CAP money goes only to those and those farms that have a certain level of not too high use of pesticides. And then I think that we have a lot of work to do till 2030. If you really, in circumstances, we have that in the Netherlands with the manure problem, where you say, I mean, in antibiotics, we reduced in the Netherlands 60%, only based on management by the companies and the vets and the farmers. With good advice. So that can be done. If you see the enormous differences in using pesticides between farmers, I think you can probably easily also reduce in that way a lot of the use of pesticides. If you really have to control it in certain very ecological sensitive areas, or the situation like in Africa, you come either to very technological solutions where you say, I want to have a sensor and satellite monitoring, the discussion we currently have in fisheries, and farmers will not like that. Or you say only very acquainted people like veterinarians are allowed to apply the stuff, and then you still have probably some fraud somewhere, but at least then you have taken some measures.
Exactly.
I understand Petra has to leave, so I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Petra. We'll continue the discussion, and also welcome maybe other colleagues of yours can help join in the discussion.
Thank you, Tiffany, and let me know if you repeat the poll at the end what the outcome is, okay?
Yes, we will.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So let's continue our discussion. I have Koen follow up with a comment about a technology issue. So from now, we just open up the discussion, the floor for people who can just jump in and comment and discuss. Koen, would you like to switch on your camera and microphone and explain what your thoughts?
Yeah, so my point is that some of the goals of the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork are not ideal, and I agree with a lot of the others that they can be improved. On the other hand, the idea that we just have to wait because technology solves all issues is also the other opposite, I think. And of course, technology will help, but we also need strict policies. We also need financial incentives. We also need monitoring, yeah, it's not just that technology will solve everything and we just have to wait until those new technologies will be introduced.
What was your position on regarding the question of the policy goal?
I don't think that, as I said in the beginning, the way the goals are formulated is the best possible way. On the other hand, I think sometimes it's good to start the discussion in a quite strict way, in a very clear way, to make the discussion going and to end up with more ideal goals. So yeah, on the one hand, I think it's good that they set those strict goals and made clear that there are important issues to solve. But on the other hand, I still think that the way they are formulated can be improved.
Thank you.
I totally agree with my former colleague, Koen. Nice to see you, Koen. I think we have to, technology does not work automatically. I think technology had a big influence in the past because it improved labor productivity. But we need to incentivize farmers to use that technology. And the problem is that if you want to have results by 2030, people do not buy a new spraying machine every year or new stables. They build them every 20 years or something. So in that sense, a lot have to come from management and then incentivizing farmers to have another management, operational management, I think. And that's not just waiting till they automatically buy a more expensive spraying machine. They will not do that anyway if it's more expensive. So you have to incentivize them with, well, I'm an economist like Koen, but with economic incentives to change behavior.
Thanks, Krijn and Koen. We have a question from Simone about antibiotics. Simone, do you like to share your thoughts?
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Krijn. So nice to see you at this platform. Krijn, you mentioned the positive results of lowering the application of antibiotics in husbandry. And you were right there. But at this moment, you see a very worrying situation that although this application of antibiotics in animals has indeed gone down tremendously, you see that the resistance in itself stays at a certain platform, at a certain level, and it's not going down any further. Now, this might be the result of the human use of antibiotics. And what I see in the Green Deal is a huge emphasis on nature, animals, agriculture, and not a word about humans, actually, in respect with antibiotic use. Why is it so focused and bordered on animals and not in a broader scope? Have you any idea?
No, thanks, and nice to see you, Simone, and thanks for that remark, because I was not aware of that. It's very much your specialty, of course. No, I can only guess. I have no idea. This is clearly oriented by the Commission towards, let's say, farming and nature. You could speculate that with the agricultural policy is traditionally an area, as well as the common market and food safety, where the Commission has authority. Well, a lot of people said we should move from agricultural to food policy, or perhaps even better to food system policy. But when it comes to the whole issue also of obesity and all the things at consumer level, if it's not food safety, then perhaps there could be less room within the treaties for the Commission to act there, but that's just a speculation at this moment. I will take your message to that working group, because that's an important point.
Thank you, Krijn.
Thank you, Simona. I have Caroline gave a comment about the wizard and the prophet. Caroline, would you like to explain what you mean by this? The wizard and the prophet need to become friends to solve multifactorial issues. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. This refers to the distinction between wizards who think that technology will solve everything, and prophets who want to change the system to become more sustainable, more organic, etc. And I think that most problems we are facing now, like climate change and food security in the world, cannot be solved by one approach. So that is why I stated that the wizards and the prophets should work together, become friends, and find the solution for each problem that fits the best.
You mean right now, the ones who want to make system change and the technology are not working together enough?
Yeah, it's a bit like they are fighting each other. The wizard wants to put everything on technology and puts his faith only in technology, while the prophet is more like we want to change the whole production agricultural system and be more sustainable and go back to nature, etc. And I think we need to get out of this controversy and work together to find the best solutions. A bit like what I said before about focusing so much on organic systems in the Green Deal. It cuts off other possible solutions that might be quite beneficial.
Certainly, that is one of the controversies in the focus. Krijn, do you agree with this? Because who should be then in the roadmap forward to bring the stakeholders closer together to develop the sustainability labeling and then to bring the dashboard? In fact, we do have a lot of these chain elements are there, right? Technology is there, database also there. There's a lot of labeling also. So what is needed?
Well, I tend to agree with Caroline that especially if you go away from using chemicals due to their environmental damage, and anyway due to climate change that farmers experience, solutions are probably much more local in the future. You cannot have only standard solutions. It also is because farming only slowly reorganizes itself. You can do it only once, and it means that a lot of farmers who are older are not going to leave the industry. So keeping farmers on the land seems also to be a policy, nearly a policy goal, or at least things that farmers want. Although some of that labor force could be very well used in the rest of the economy where we don't have enough people in the working force. And that also means that one region you have a lot of possibilities for short change or for nature conservation or for tourism on the farm or care farming, where in other regions you have not. So in that sense, I think that problems and solutions are getting a little bit more local. And that means that you should not at the top be too prescriptive in your solutions, but that you should give room to the people to find the solutions themselves. That's my basic thinking, in which technology will help, but only in some cases and not in other cases. And at least in the Dutch or the European way, that's also, it's an easier way than the command and control from the top, I think. So in general, I agree. I still think that if you go to digital dashboards, this is a session on digital food, perhaps because that's the only project I'm still working on, but there are huge challenges for a farmer to integrate his data and not being busy the half a day with filling all these websites and these forms and having, at least in the Netherlands in some cases, 6 or 7 inspections per year because people are in a lot of different food safety and sustainability schemes. I even and then honestly, some of these schemes, if you really want to do fraud, you drive to Belgium and you buy some of the things and nobody will notice because you do not enter the invoice in your farm management system. So I think that there is really an issue of data integration at the farm level.
I wonder if Anka Hemminga can also join in our discussion, or Rudy from Consumer Goods Forum. I see you in the audience. our past digital chat speakers, which also you represent. Anka, thanks. Last time we talked about this database, GFLI database. Also, I asked the question of, for example, applying for the egg chain, that working, for example, with companies like MOBA, where Krijn has also experience with. So I would like to hear your thinking about after hearing this kind of another perspective on this measurement and metrics.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations with again a very good session and very interesting points of view. It is a very hard question that you are raising, and what I definitely will not do is vote for the one or the other. And I know the book that Caroline is referring to, which is also describing very interesting points of view. If we look at the progress that we have made already, and so the antibiotic reduction is one, and there's a very good question on then the resistance that comes with it. But I'm really of the glass half full type, and being very happy with the reduction of all the antibiotics that first of all are not being used. I think that's a big win. If we look at the potential within animal nutrition, which is of course my cup of tea, then what we see is that there are still opportunities. There are still opportunities to improve, but not forget already the huge progress that we have made. And the progress that we have made is partly due to the fact that we are better capable of measuring. So here comes maybe my answer to the question, to measuring what we feed the animals, and also to determine what they really do need. And the better you can feed the animals towards the real requirements, the easier it gets. And it counts for humans as well. We are all mammals. So if you eat way more than you need, then it's really disturbing your intestinal system. Same counts for animals. So we know exactly for the protein part, for the carbohydrate part, for the vitamins, for the, well, up to very detailed levels, I would say, how we can provide animals the best nutrition possible. And there comes another field of expertise next to that. So next to the fact that we know nutritionally what they need, and for their welfare, what it is that they need, because that is something different. And there comes the environmental impact. And I mentioned in my speech, for example, the slow grow bird, where consumers are convinced that a slow grow bird has their preference over a very efficient bird that's being used today, which is fine. I'm not judging there. It's just that you have to take into account that there is a different impact when you look at it from an environmental impact point of view, when you look at it, for example, from a carbon footprint point of view, as one of the environmental impact factors, if you look at the land use that's needed for that. And it's all fine if that's your choice, but you have to somehow take that into account. One of the points being mentioned is biodiversity in these calls. And which is part of the farm to fork as well. And that can be conflicting with the very efficient farming that we are having, for example, in the Netherlands, but I would say pretty much over Europe. So we do need metrics, to my point of view, according to a very reliable, independent way of measuring. So that we can keep comparing apples to apples, and we have to acknowledge the fact that taking more factors into account doesn't make it easier, but it makes it even more important to try to find the right balance there, and to know in which field or in which area you are improving, which might have a negative impact on other factors. And I think that's just what it is. And looking at the GFLI, for example, the Dutch dairy sector is using the GFLI database in their life cycle assessment for dairy farms, just to make it very practical.
Well, thanks. I think you also somewhat responded to your last question about how do you harmonize different interests and different type of requirements and focal areas. And that's indeed it's complex, because when you have all different myriad of indicators, maybe here we understand why the European Commission put out a 50% hard target reduction, which is simpler as a policy goal. Yeah. This is a easier to understand and communicatable goal. But of course, the challenge still is how do you get there? So I'm also curious, we mentioned that we like to redo our poll question. So after the debate discussion so far, I would like to, maybe Bianca can pull up the second question again, whether you changed your mind about this preposition. Is it a sound or is it, yeah. So okay, let's see if we have Krijn or Petra or Anka have convinced our participant otherwise. If the results done, we can show it. We have also Gerrit here, who wrote an article about the technologists and the ideologists should bury their hatchets to work together. Gerrit, if you are still here, would you like to explain a short summary of what you wrote in the Volkskrant article?
Yes, I meant.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Oh, I wrote in that
the sound is
technology and when they are fighting each other, you don't come to a solution. So you have to find out what is the good thing from the idealist and from the technologist. So the solution is when you work together with the idealists on environmental things, you need technology as well. That's why I was also voting against the dogma of 25% of biologic agriculture, because then you put them in a frame again. That you should work these two frames. They should work really together. That's what I wrote in the Volkskrant.
Thank you, Bianca. Do we have the result? Do our people, our audience, still stick to the same position? Now it changed. Even more people, maybe we have less people now, but more people, the majority think it's not a good policy goal. Thank you. Krijn, would you like to still respond to the questions and from also comment from Anka and from our audience, our participant? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. I was already typing in an answer to Lars, but it's easier to explain. Lars had a good question in saying, or had a question in how could you, on one hand, harmonize data and standards, and on the otherwise, people have different objectives in income or in living circumstances or wealth creation or whatever. My answer to that is that we do not deal with the objectives of farmers and their families. They can choose their lifestyle, or if they go for income or another way of wealth creation or number of hours they work. The point is, it's easiest to explain with emissions. If you say, well, we have a problem with carbon dioxide emissions, or we have a problem with pesticide runoff to waters, or we have a problem with ammonia in the Netherlands that leads to less biodiversity in neighboring nature areas, then you could, as a government, say, well, these are the emissions that are allowed. In other words, these are the indicators. And then a farmer can deal with those emissions or emission rights in the same way as he deals with other factors of production. Or you could say, well, this is an indicator for biodiversity, this is an indicator for pesticide use, this is an indicator for, once again, CO2 emissions. And based on those indicators, we label your farm as red, orange, yellow, light green, or dark green. And if you're light green or dark green, you get subsidies, or you have to pay less tax or whatever. And if you're red, you lose your permit to farm in this area sooner or later. So that's and within those constraints that as a society we put upon the farmer can still use his optimal set of technology methods, how much he wants to work and to earn. That's then in the hand of the farmer.
Thank you. I have actually another question from Anton about the nuance of managing pesticide. Anton, would you like to explain?
Yeah, the kilos is a nice measure. Everybody was very happy with the neonicotinoids because it reduced the amounts of pesticides used tremendously. It took years and the persistent toxicologists to show that they were quite nasty. Roundup was usually presented as a fairly harmless herbicide because it was broken down, and we're still not quite sure whether it's carcinogenic, but it's no longer the good thing. So I think the kilogram discussion gets a problem at a certain stage. It's a weak criteria.
You don't agree with it. Any comments? Krijn, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think that was my question to Petra, and how far you could deal with environmental impact measurements, where you say, well, this is the persistence, or this is the toxicology to water life, or to whatever. And then, of course, the digital problem is, how do you integrate this data from the pesticides itself with the data from the point of using the circumstances under which and the place where the pesticide is applied, because these two together are then in that sense the end. And then you should still probably have a norm where you say, well, in this area I accept as a water authority so much risk, but with technology that is in principle thinkable, that you find such solutions and that these solutions are induced by a clever policy. On the other hand, as Koen pointed out earlier, don't wait for everybody to have adopted that solution and say, in the meantime, we do not have to regulate. These solutions only start working if you first regulate that something has to be done.
The sad thing is the regulations are usually initiated on the basis of research done by the companies. The whole product files are prepared by the companies themselves, and they say, look, it's
there are probably, well, that was for Petra to answer, and there are probably a couple of those type of issues. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually also ask Rudy from Consumer Goods Forum. In our past talks, we discussed several initiatives. For example, the data port, and then the True Code, which are data standards and tools or structures, infrastructure to try to answer the question of linking farm to fork. And you are in charge of the standardization within Consumer Goods Forum. So I'd like to ask you for your comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. So from our perspective, what we try to do is rather than say, this is a hard KPI or this is a clear standard you have to follow, we try to build an ecosystem so that companies move tendentially following business in the right direction. So we are not a strong believer of hard-coded KPIs. We do believe in signals that help companies to navigate in the right direction. So it's a different philosophy that we apply. And down the road, we might develop some standards that can support them in what they do, like giving them a compass. So you might need this tool while navigating. And then later on, you might have a GPS system, which is more precise than the compass and doesn't only give you directions, but also gives you position. And so that's our philosophy here. And with impact measuring, the idea that we have is first identify one answer to the question is, how can we make moving in the right direction more attractive? Rather than saying, here's a fence, you cannot move right, you cannot move left, that's illegal, you should be doing this. So that's definitely not the way we would approach it. And we sometimes see with a big worry what comes out of regulations. So I think it's more the holistic thinking about how to really get there. And say, where do we get everybody? Where do we capture everybody? Everybody is coming from a different position. Some are further developed, some are further down the line, some are far advanced, some are left behind. The thing is rather, how can we create a cohesive team that then accepts that while still making sound business? So I choose the word sound for healthy, so to say, sound business moving in the right direction. And this is why we also developed some standards like data ports or true code, which is to try to find answers to questions in order to support companies moving in the right direction. I hope that helps.
Thanks. But that's a question actually for also Krijn. Does that, in the knowing also a lot of initiative moving direction, like Rudy mentioned, and also with others, how do we, actually the stakeholders are on the table to build this data dashboard, aren't they?
Yeah, my point is, thanks, by the way, for the explanation and the nice ideas. It goes relatively easy, I think, in those situations. If I take the farm perspective, where a farmer has one product and is linked to a slaughterhouse for pigs or probably the eggs, because well, then you still have issues perhaps with the local environmental circumstances and that type of data. But in general, if you have a food chain which is one product and where there is also an important player, be it a slaughterhouse or a retailer or whoever, then there is probably a driving mechanism to organize the data exchange in that chain. It still can be problematic because there can be distrust between the different levels in that food chain. The result is, of course, that farmers are becoming more a contractor of that company. Because the company then has probably a lot of the data on the farm performance. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it is more easy than, for instance, in arable farming or vegetable farming or on mixed farms, where farms have quite different products. And that I should perhaps explain that my own background is in arable farming. Actually, I do the administration of our own arable farm. But there you have typically sugar beets, potatoes, onions, wheat, and you deal with 4 or 5 companies that take your product and send you invoices. And there it is less easy to get a full digitalization and a solution at farm level that works for everybody.
Yes, that's as you mentioned, there are 85,000 farms in the European system. So they need to be, there are some large ones, some small ones. So this digitizing capability need to be empowered for.
Yeah, on the other hand, we have forced in Europe the banks under the PSD2 arrangement that they provide their data electronically, digitally to the bank. In the Netherlands, they did this already, but everybody in Europe now has access to his data from his bank in a digital form, because we didn't want the banks to have a monopoly on financial software. Hungary has obliged every company to issue its invoices in a digital form in universal business language. And Mr. Orban wants a copy in the tax office for clear reasons. So in that sense, in the coming years, it's not so difficult to move with all these paperwork to a digital form. Either companies do it themselves or the Commission obliges companies to do that. And then I assume there will be clever software guys who integrate that into a good farm dashboard.
Yes, so we have I'd like to actually also ask Dick to, again, we gave a kind of conclusion remark. From our discussion so far, we have a lot of important players, from big companies to researchers to IT companies to standard setting bodies. And this will be followed up by actually to, for example, develop a step further on the topic of such standard setting and dashboard. Dick, would you like to?
Yes, well, many wise things have been said. Unmute myself. There is something on my screen. Thank you, Krijn, and thank you, Rudy, for stepping back in, and Anke. What we're talking about here is standard setting is something that needs to be done locally. A wise lesson from Krijn was indeed try to have something overarching and apply it locally. There's still room for it, so do it. And he's advocating a sound dashboard. Well, the guy we're missing right now is Hans de Gier, who's on the Dataport project. Rudy just brought to memory. That is a project that is, in fact, a universal integration of all kinds of data. Unless you do something, Krijn, and we didn't talk about that, you do the taxonomy right. So you need to call a table in all languages. And if a three-leg table is not a table, you shouldn't call it a table in one of these languages. So actually, the lawmaking at a digital level needs to be about a basic taxonomy. And then clever, indeed, IT people will solve the problem and will create various universal standards, I guess. And in the end, the political discussion remains. As Rudy said, you don't want fences, you do want to make people, you want to bring them into a positive state of mind, moving in the right direction. So you need to leave room for creativity. And at the same time, you need to create trust in order to make people do things. So the basic lesson I take from all of these discussions is how to bring it to a local level from an overarching big universal standpoint, and how to move people in contexts and companies in contexts in the right direction. And that is about political philosophy. How do you do that? And I think that we learn here that we approach it from a technological point of view, but you have to approach this from a political logical point of view, how to make this work between people and between local administrators and companies that are located somewhere, and they have to act in context. I think that is the big wrap up of everything I learned, but I'm expressing it as a political philosopher.
Thank you, Dick. And thank you again. Thank you, Krijn. Thank you, Rudy, Anke, and Petra, who's not here anymore, for contributing to a great discussion. Behind me, we have already the topic for next session in 2 weeks on fair trade. So we continue discussion about standard certification and trust. I hope to see everyone here again in 2 weeks, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.